Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. 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 Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya.
So we're at Skandasramam on a beautiful, breezy summer morning. We want to talk about today, we want to talk about the genesis of this ashram, how this ashram came to be. We'll talk about a little bit about the life of Bhagavan and the devotees here, among which was his mother, starting in late 1915. If you remember, Bhagavan came up and started living on the hill in 1899. That was after having been in the temple for about 6 months, being at Gurumurtum and the adjacent mango grove for about 18 months. Then there was a short stint at Arunagirinath temple there near the Ayankulam tank, you know. And then that was followed by, I believe, Pavlakunru, period of Pavlakunru. That's where Mother came and saw Bhagavan. And then after that, Bhagavan moved up on the hill, probably first at Satguru Swami Cave. I don't think first at Virupaksha Cave. Then finally in Virupaksha Cave. And there was a long stint at Virupaksha. Now from the early days at Virupaksha Cave, Bhagavan and the devotees there, the sadhus who were with him, they discovered that there was a water problem in the summer months. They had water in the winter, but by the end of March, up through middle of June, like that, there was no water. So they would shift down to Mango Tree Cave because it was near that Mulipal Tirtham, and there was an abundant supply, a perennial supply of water at Mulipal. But already in 1902, you know, the drinking water at Mulipal was not that great. So in 1902, they started keeping an eye open for maybe a source of drinking water. And one day, I think it was Jadaswami and Bhagavan were up here just above the current ashram. They were on a walk, and Bhagavan noticed the soil was damp there. And he pointed out to Jadaswami, who and asked him, you know, to dig out the soil. Not, I don't think at that moment, but at some later time, Jadaswami came up, dug out the soil, and sure enough, it turned out to be a spring. So that became their source for drinking water, and it was pure and pristine water. So they would come up. They would come up with their kamandalus and fill them from Virupaksha. Come up and fill their drinking water bottles, their kamandalus, from that source. Now that same place, it's interesting because there's a story associated with that place, and it was one day when Bhagavan and Mudaliar Swami, not related to Mudaliar Pati, who when they were walking in that same area, they came across a young shepherdess, a young girl who was with her goats there, and she was weeping. And they asked, what's happened? You know, why are you crying? She said, one of my goats has fallen down into this crevice. If you go back up here above Skanda Ashram, you'll see that there's these huge crevices, you know, very dramatic. And that goat had fallen down in one of those crevices. This is at the same area where they found this spring. And so Bhagavan just immediately just climbed down into that crevice, which was, according to those who saw it, was no minor thing. It was very steep and very sheer. He climbed down in there, put the goat on his shoulders, climbed back up, handed it over to the girl, and she was, so thrilled, to have her goat back. Um, but anyway, that scene, that site there, that is the origins of this ashram. So once that that spring was established, and I think they dug out in a couple places, they dug out below it. Then around, not long after that, Kandaswami, he was a devotee, you can say, from Coimbatore area. Not Coimbatore itself, but a village outside Coimbatore. He didn't like the fact that Bhagavan had to climb up from Virupaksha with his 2 kamandalus and fill them up and come down, going back and forth like that. And so he made up his mind to build a place for them to live here at the site of the water, where the spring was. Now, the thing about it is, anyone who's been to Skandasramam, you see how well established it is. And you would just imagine that they just came here and put up buildings. You had this nice garden, you had all these nice trees, you had this flat, level ground, but that was not the case at all. There was nothing like that here. It was a sheer, steady decline all the way down, just as we see when we walk down from Skandasramam. And Bhagavan says, in a couple of places, he remarks about just the unbelievable challenge to do what Kandaswami had set himself to do. And basically what it meant was he would build a perimeter wall, and if you've seen the front of Skandasramam, you will see that the perimeter wall is quite high. Now, why is it so high? Because that indicates the incline that Kandaswami had to work with. So he had to chip out rock and fill in the area of the perimeter wall in order to get a flat space to establish the ashram. And Bhagavan goes on further to say that, so he had to do all that, and that was mostly rock, but then he needed soil because he wanted to plant a garden. There were no trees here. There was no garden, nothing. So he had to hand carry soil and lay on top of after the already just very prodigious work of chipping out rock and leveling it and filling in that perimeter wall. Now, what Bhagavan tells is that Kandaswami did this work on his own. He started in 1906. It was not completed for almost 10 years. The end of 1915 is when they first started staying here. And it was only at the very end of that work that others came in, Paramal Swami and a few other workers came in to help him. But the bulk of the work, all that chipping out and leveling, that was done by Kandaswami alone. And Bhagavan's very emphatic about that fact, So now, one thing we should mention about Kandaswami is that I think it was already in 1905, Bhagavan tells, he was the one who planted the banyan trees and peepal trees and other trees along the path, even if you go down, well, In fact, Bhagavan tells us that Banyan Tree Cave, which was originally called Satguru Swami Cave, it became Banyan Tree Cave because Kandaswami planted the banyan tree there. So that's how it became Banyan Tree Cave, was because of Kandaswami. So Kandaswami was already doing tough work, because he would go down to Mulipal and bring water up by hand and water all the trees he had planted, which includes that peepal tree. It just died a few years ago, but that huge peepal tree, just if you go down from here, just after you pass Skandasramam on the right, there was a huge peepal tree. Everyone loved that tree. It was so beautiful. It died a few years ago.
Wasn't there enough water here to water the plants?
No. Not, see, in those, you see, this spring here was used for drinking water. So, and that area down there, Mulipal's closer by. So it wouldn't have made sense to come all the way up here to get water for the trees. Of course, once he planted trees here and the gardens here, then he would use this water, of course. But I'm saying originally, before this place was established, he would water his trees from Mulipal Tirtham. So he was a very energetic guy. And, you know, and Bhagavan goes on and on about how robust his strength and his endurance was. So, the main thing, of course, is to establish a flat piece of ground, plant the trees. Mango tree was planted here, which has since died. And then these buildings. So originally, the first buildings to be built here would be this veranda, the 2 rooms inside, which we'll look at, mother's room, and that's it. There wasn't the puja room at that time. The kitchen came, I think, a little bit afterwards, but this veranda, the 2 rooms here, mother's room, those were the first, that was the main building. The puja room came afterward. Now, it's very interesting, this puja room, because it actually came only in I think around 1920 or 1921. So it was toward the end of Bhagavan's time on the hill, okay? And that's significant, because what they did, I mean, from a construction point of view, it was not that significant. They knocked out the back wall. It was one Vridhanachala Gurukal, I think it was called. He was from Tiruvannamalai, knocked out the back wall and just made the mountain the rear wall of the ashram. But what's significant about that is that this ashram became a cave. So now many people may not appreciate what a guha is for the South Indian ethos, South Indian psyche, how important that is, a guha. What is so special about a guha? And what the literature, what the Upanishads, and going back all through history, through the Vedas, you know, is that one of the names of the divine is space, you see. And so guha is a kind of a symbol of the unconditional, of God. Every sacred mountain, Arunachala being no exception, is said to have a guha at its center. And Bhagavan said that about Arunachala, and he even had a vision about it. And not long after he had that vision, the temple authorities in Adiyanamala, when they did their Kumbhabhishekam, they notified him that they had discovered a tunnel underneath the Adiyanamala temple, from the Adiyanamala temple kitchen, and it was said by tradition from the Purana that tunnel, that cave, led all the way to Arunachala's second prakara. That's what the tradition said. Well, here Bhagavan had this vision of this internal, glorious, like Brahma heaven, Brahma world inside the mountain. Okay? Then, not long after that vision, well, immediately after that vision, not too long after that vision, he read in the Arunachala Purana that in fact that was written about. He did not know that. So he was surprised to see written in the scripture something describing what he experienced in his vision. The vision was not really while he was asleep, it was when he was in meditation. Then not long after that, this was around 1918, when he was on Pradakshina, the temple authorities at Adiyanamala temple, they were preparing for Kumbhabhishekam, and they mentioned to Bhagavan that there's this tunnel, and so they showed it to him. And again, that seemed to match his vision as well. So, That's the kind of theological basis for a guha. So that was 1920 or 1921, somehow somewhere about that time when this puja room was established. And at that time they put an image of Yogambika there. So that became the puja room. Now we want to go back a little bit and catch up with. So that was kind of establishing a little bit the timeline of the foundation of the ashram itself. Yeah. So now I want to simultaneously tell a little bit of the story about Mother and how she came. So let's go back a little bit in our timeline. Remember, of course, Bhagavan, we know, left Tiruchuli 1896. So that was in the end of August. That was the last time he saw his mother. And then when they found out, when he was at Gurumurtam, the family found out where he was. So Mother came with her son. Which son was it? It was her eldest son. She came in December of 1898, found Bhagavan at Pavalakundra, begged him to come home. He wouldn't even really speak to her, and that's when he wrote the famous note, you know. So that was the last time she saw him, and then several things happened following that visit. In 1900, that same son, that means Bhagavan's elder brother, Nagasami, passed away. And then Neliapar Ayer, Bhagavan's father's brother, that means Bhagavan's paternal uncle, he passed away. And then what else happened? Bhagavan's younger brother, Nagasundram, that means who we know is Chinnaswami, Bhagavan's younger brother, his two children died. So now Alagammal, Bhagavan's mother, was left. See, Bhagavan's father's brother, that means Neliapar Ayer, had been their source of income. You know, he's the one that sustained the family after the loss of Bhagavan's father. For devotees who don't remember, Bhagavan's father died when Bhagavan was about 12 years old, and he came into the care of Neliapar Ayer. So now he's died, so Mother is no longer has his support. The family home in Tiruchuli had been sold, you know, long before, to pay off family debts and expenses for the family. So Mother's kind of stranded, and now her eldest son has passed away. Yeah, so, and then her youngest son's children have passed away. So in 1913, Bhagavan's brother and his sister-in-law and his mother went to Tiruchuli. That's where the family deity was. And they were asking for the blessing of another child, okay? This is the way I remember the story. That was around 1913. And I think on the way up, they stopped and saw Bhagavan. That's how it was. Or it was on the way back. Either way, they stopped and saw Bhagavan and asked for his blessing. So Bhagavan was still been at Virupaksha at that time. And see, they're thinking about, so really everybody has passed away. There's just Mother, Chinnaswami and Chinnaswami's wife. Okay, that's all that's left of the family, really, the immediate family. So they're thinking about the continuation of the lineage. So they come to Bhagavan, they ask for his blessing. A year later, a boy is born. That's T.N. Venkataraman, our first ashram president. Well, you could say our second, because Chinnaswami would have been, in a way, the first, but Chinnaswami is always designated as Sarvadhikari. So TNV was the first real president, you know. So he was born in the spring of 1914, I think it was in the springtime. And then they made a trip a year later, that was in April of 1915, they made a trip back up to Tirupati for that, what do you call the ceremony where you do the first haircutting, you know? Yeah, they did the ceremony cutting his hair. And when they came back, going back to, and I think by this time Mother was in Manamadurai. I don't know if it was in, she wasn't in Tiruchuli, it was in Manamadurai. They stopped here and found Bhagavan at Virupaksha cave. And she made a declaration she wasn't leaving. She wasn't going back. Okay, so that was 1915, April of 1915. She made the declaration. She told the family she wasn't going back. Now she felt like she had done her duty. Her son and daughter-in-law had a child, and she had done her duties in the world, and she was going to spend her time here. So that was, again, that was at Virupaksha cave, but not long after that, she fell very sick. She got typhoid and almost died. And it was said that it was really only Bhagavan's care that saved her life. So after that illness, she did go back. She went back to Manamadurai and kind of to recuperate there. But not long later, and I think it would have probably been even the same year, I think probably about the end of 1915. No, it was not even that long. It was just a few months later she came back, and this time for good. She had planned to stay for good, but she fell sick, so she went back for a few months. Then she came back again, and this time for good. And that was just before they moved up here. Okay, so she first established herself in Virupaksha. Of course, I say established herself. She only came in the day. She would stay with Echimal in the night. And but Echimal could see. See, Mother at that time, I don't know what age Echimal would have been at that time, but she would have been younger, quite younger than Mother. Mother would have been in her mid-60s. So coming up each day to the ashram was very strenuous for her. And she didn't complain, but Echimal could see it was a strain for her. So Echimal on her own, and we don't have any, I don't think that Mother put her up to it. I think it was really her own, made an appeal to the community at Virupaksha, to Bhagavan, and to the sadhus there. Look, you know, Mother should be here with you. And the Swamis, you know, they were not that keen on the idea of having a woman. They considered themselves monks. They were monks, you can say, and that didn't fit in with the model of monkhood, you know. Now, Echimal made a point in her kind of presentation, in her appeal to them. She made a point of saying that, look, I, Echimal, Mudalayarpati, Desramal, we will not take advantage of this privilege. This privilege will be extended to Mother only. Okay, was very emphatic about that. But the sadhus were saying, nothing doing. You know, nothing doing. You know, we're monks. Women can't live in a monastery. You know. So finally, the discussion went on, and then finally, Mother very sorrowfully stood up to leave. You know, and as she started to go, Bhagavan stood up. Bhagavan had been silent, by the way, in all that discussion, evidently. He stood up. He went over and took her by the hand. He said, "Come on, Mom, Mother, we'll find somewhere else to live. You know, no problem." Well, of course, the sadhus that had been blessed all these years to be in Bhagavan's close company, they weren't about to let Bhagavan go, and they went face down into the dirt, kneeled at his feet, wept, said, "No, no, no, Bhagavan, please, you stay, mother, you stay. Everything will be fine." Well, that was the end of that. And everything was good. So mother had a place to be. So now he's died, so mother is no longer has his support. The home, the family home. So far as we know, we do know that he did see it. So far as we know, that's his mother's brother. I think really mother just wanted to really be near Bhagavan. I don't know, it's not clear to me at that time that she had any ideas about renunciation. Now that comes, but at this beginning stage, it's not clear that she had any ideas about renunciation. I think she just wanted to cook for her son and be near her beloved son who she hadn't seen in 20 years, had not seen much in 20 years. Sheshadri Swami made a joke about the grihastas living on the hill. And when the visitors go there, they give them sugar cakes. Now, Sheshadri for sure was just joking. He knew Bhagavan's value. He knew who Bhagavan was. He had no doubt. And but that was the kind of the talk in the town, because people in the town, not everybody had really understood who Bhagavan was at that point. And they had never had a rishi living in their midst. And they may have forgotten, I don't know if you remember this, but Gautama Rishi, who was the guru to Parvati when she came here to do tapas. It appears in the Arunachala Mahatmyam. When she came here to do her tapas, okay, and he instructed her, he was living here with his wife and mother, okay? And see, that's the rishi model. The rishis were beyond the ashramas. They didn't need to seek liberation because they were liberated. So they weren't bound by those mechanisms that were devised to help you in the journey to liberation. They were fully realized. And someone will maybe say, well, but shrama means, I think one of the etymologies of shrama is like path to liberation or the way to liberation. But it was, in the rishis' context, was not about their own liberation, which had already been vouchsafed. It was the liberation of their students, you see. So that was the model. And people slowly, see, Ganapati Muni, when he came here, he understood immediately. Now, he came and met Bhagavan before Mother was here. But he understood, and in fact, he's the one who gave Bhagavan. If you remember, it was in Virupaksha, Deepam, 1907. Ganapati Muni came up you remember, he came up and he knelt down before Bhagavan and wept and said, after he'd been searching all these years, and finally he found what he was looking for. And I think it was maybe only a couple of days after that, he gave Bhagavan the name Ramana and said he should be called, and he told his disciples, by that time I think Ganapati Muni had disciples already, instructed them to refer to him as Maharshi, because he was a rishi. And but I think many people in the town hadn't yet appreciated that, and that slowly did come, that they did begin to appreciate that. And so it was finally accepted that, yes, a woman can live in an ashram on Arunachala. Now, the one other thing we should mention in that regard is is the name of this place. Because, see, in 1915, when they moved up here, Kandaswami only stayed here. Remember, Kandaswami, the builder, the ashram is named after him, okay? At least that's what Bhagavan tells us, you know. But what we know from the literature is already even then, Bhagavan was thought to be an incarnation. He was thought to be Lord Murugan. That means Skanda, right? And in fact, there's so many interesting scenes on that theme, relating to that theme about Bhagavan being Lord Subramanya. And one is a time at Virupaksha when Ganapati Muni asked Bhagavan, because he had written the Ramana Gita, and he had written that he had referred to Bhagavan as Lord Subramanya in some one of those verses. So he wanted to check Bhagavan, is he good with that? Are you know? So he basically asked him directly, you know, are you Lord Subramanya? Is that who you are? You know, Bhagavan didn't say anything. He understood, he heard what he said, but he just didn't reply. So that night, I think Ganapati Muni at that time was living on the hill. He may have been staying at Mango Tree Cave at that time. He made a prayer that Bhagavan would give him some answer to this question. So he came the next day. He didn't ask the question, but Bhagavan, it so happens, who was it? I think it was Iswaraswami, had written a verse on the Vinayaka image in the little nook there in Virupaksha. Had written a verse that day, had written a verse on it, and he had asked Bhagavan to write a verse. So Bhagavan wrote a verse. So the next day, this question was never raised again, but Bhagavan showed him this verse that he had written about the Vinayaka. And in this verse, Bhagavan asks Vinayaka for his protection. Give your little brother your protection, you see. So Ganapati felt like he had all the answer he needed on that, you know. And but there's many different, disparate, related. This theme comes up all the time. Devotees, many devotees, on different occasions over the decades, had dreams about Bhagavan as Lord Murugan. That Valamalai Swami, you know, who was one of the most noted Murugan devotees of the 20th century, you know, he came here, and I think that was at Skandasramam. That was here. I'm pretty sure. It could have been Virupaksha, but I think it was here. Yeah, I think it was here. But anyway, he came and had darshan of Bhagavan, and Bhagavan was inside, and he was waiting outside. And when Bhagavan came out, he said he couldn't see anything but Lord Murugan. That's all he saw, you know. So Bhagavan tells us this ashram is named after Kandaswami. And see, Skanda, for those who don't know, Skanda is the Sanskrit version of Kanda, right? Same meaning, Kanda, Skanda, you know. So that's how the ashram got its name. By the way, Kandaswami only lived here for a short time. He went back to his native place shortly after and was not seen again. One thing that should be mentioned, you know, because see, there's proper fittings and teak wood and things like this had to be purchased. So where did those sadhus get the money for that? And we don't know all the sources, but at least one major source, believe it or not, was the mutt head of the Kovilur mutt. Okay, his name was Mahadeva Swami, and he was offering mutt funds, and he says, if anybody challenges this, I'll offer from my own funds. He said, Bhagavan He says, normally the mutt funds are for the mutt only. He said, but Bhagavan is beyond all, he's the supreme, So how can we avoid but to support him, So it's believed that at least the things that needed to be purchased, and especially, see, the hard work was done by Kandaswami to lay the ground, but then you've got to bring in skilled workers to come in and you've got to purchase items, So that was, at least the principal donator would have been that mutt head. Mahadeva Swami was his name. Now, we want to say a little bit about the community that was living here. Of course, there was Kunja Swami, Vishwanatha Swami, Mastan Swami, Ramanatha Brahmachari. Kunja Swami came a little later, 1920. Mother. Oh, interestingly, we don't want to forget about Chinnaswami, and that's picking up the family story, because remember, we left off with the birth of his son, who's T.N. Venkataraman, in the spring of 1914. Then in 1915, uh, uh, they came here, and Mother decided to stay, and the family went back. Well, a year later, Mangalam, that means TNV's mother, Chinnaswami's wife, passed away. Okay, so that was 1916. So then I think it was in August of 1917, Mother sent message down there and said, why don't you come here? Now, he had a son, but he also had a sister, Bhagavan's sister, Alagammal. And I don't know if it was Mother who suggested it, but I imagine it may have been. Put the young boy in the care of Alagammal, which they were very happy to have. They were very happy to have him. And so that was done. And Chinnaswami came here, initially living in the town, and he would come up each day, and he would go down and have his food there. And the sadhus said, no, the little Swami, they were calling him already then. In other words, the little Swami, Bhagavan being the big Swami. By the way, Bhagavan in those days was called like Brahmanaswami or Gurumuttan Swami or Mauni Swami. In the early days, and I guess by then he had the official name Ramana Maharshi, but it's not clear to me that the immediate community was using that name for him, at least amongst themselves. They would call him Swami, okay? So Chinnaswami was the little Swami, um, and they said, no, the little Swami should eat here with us. And so that happened. And then finally it was agreed that he should be living here. And then about a year later, in 1918, he took sannyas. Okay? So now to say a little bit about the life here, because they were all living here together. Mother had her own room. Bhagavan stayed here in this room, just to the left side, so adjacent to her room. And the others slept in this main hall. Or perhaps also on the veranda. So now I'm going to simultaneously tell a little bit of the story about Martha and how she. So let's go back. Remember, was Bhagavan, we know that to 1896. So that was And Bhagavan tells that they would wake up typically about 3 a.m. Now, many devotees don't know this, but Bhagavan was very keen on Brahma Muhurta, you know. He says it in one place, but he doesn't say it often. I think there's only one place he talks about the value of Brahma Muhurta. So Bhagavan seemed to follow that. At least we know that was the case when he was in Ramanasram, and evidently that was the case here. He would get up at 3. Now his mother would get up at 4, according to the record. She would get up at 4, and then she would chant. And then I think at around 5, Bhagavan would go out, and when they came back, I think that's when they would chant Akshara Manamale. And then at 6, they would go out and have their baths, and then they have breakfast at 8. Okay? I think in the very early morning hours, it was meditation. That's what they say. And then again in the evening, around, I think it was 6 o'clock. Yes, they would chant Akshara Manamale again, and they had other recitations they would do. And at 7:30, they would typically have their meals. But Kandaswami tells that about every second or third day, at least for some period of time, every second or third day, Bhagavan would fall into samadhi. And they would have trouble rousing him. And they got into this habit of blowing conchs. Kandaswami said it wasn't like one conch. They would several of them blow conchs at the same time. And he said in one place, on those days, we would have dinner at 9. So I don't know what that meant, if they were just waiting for Bhagavan to come out of samadhi, or if they were trying to rouse him all that time. I don't know. It's very interesting. But evidently, according to Kandaswami, who is a very reliable chronicler, every second or third day, Bhagavan, during this evening recitation, would just fall into samadhi state. So he would be gone, you know. There was a mango tree here in those days, and they would sometimes in the day, they would sit underneath that tree, and Bhagavan used to joke, because this mango tree evidently never gave any fruit. So they used to joke that, Bhagavan would joke that, well, see, this mango tree, she's like us. She's gotten associated with us, and we're childless sadhus, and so he or she, this mango tree, he or she has become a sadhu as well, you know. So that's the reason the mango tree never gave fruit, according to Bhagavan. Okay, so now one of the things when we talked about Mother's story, we left off with the we left off with a question about what led her here, because I think it dawned on her slowly, maybe not immediately. I'm not sure about this, but I think it dawned on her a little slowly that, oh, she was going to have to be a renunciate. Or perhaps she had had the idea in her mind to become a renunciate, but she didn't know what all that might entail. And it was a kind of a little bit of a harsh reality, I think, for her to find out what all that meant for her. So one of the things that Bhagavan made clear to her from the beginning was that she wouldn't have family privileges. Because she was Bhagavan's mother, she wouldn't have special privileges, as Bhagavan didn't see that he should have special privileges either. And we know, every devotee knows that Bhagavan followed that all of his life. He never made himself an exception, ever. And devotees constantly tried to make special offerings and special things for him, and he refused anything unless it could be shared with all. Okay? So he began, and that was already in place here when Mother arrived. So he had to win his mother over to that way of thinking. And she was slow to come to that, you know. And she wanted to be able to do things in a householder kind of way, like have a full kitchen and be able to get the items she needed and make the food that she wanted to make for Bhagavan and the other sadhus, you know. And Bhagavan said, nothing doing. You know, we will not demand or even request items from our benefactors. What is given, we will use. And then comes in the whole question about pollution from non-kosher food items. This is something else she did not like. In other words, if someone donates onions, you can't just discard them because they're not sattvic. You have to make use of them. Well, this was absolutely horrifying for her. Of course, there's this famous story. Everyone knows this story. It's when early on, Mother had the idea that she wanted to make Bhagavan papadam. See, this was probably one of her dreams all those years that she was separate from Bhagavan, that whenever she did get to be in his company again, she would make the food that he liked. So she knew he liked papadums. She wanted to make him papadums. And she knew that Bhagavan had already told her about the rules about going out and requesting specific items from donors. So what she did was, he just kind of gotten wind that something was up. He didn't know what exactly, but he knew she was up to something, because she went out under some other pretense. I don't remember exactly what. And I don't know exactly if he followed her or how he did it, but he sat under a tree, he says, and he watched her, and he observed her going to different places, and evidently it seemed obvious to him that she was requesting items. So he pretended like he didn't know anything, and that evening he pretended to be asleep, and she went into the kitchen and started making the papadums. She had gone and gotten all the ingredients to make papadums, okay? And so then Bhagavan came and kind of caught her red-handed, so to say. And she had evidently like 200 or 300 she was going to make like 200 or 300 papadums, And so she asked for his help, and he said, nothing doing. He said, you've come here, you've renounced. If you carry on like this, what will be the end of it? You see, if it's papadums, then it'll be something else that you need. He says, I'm not helping you at all, And so she fell silent, and she didn't say anything more. And then finally, son, my son, please come and help me, And she went on like that. He refused to help her. He wouldn't do it. And he said he said if he gave in here, there would be no end. We would just be in the grihastha path again, So, but she kept on, and finally she kind of won him over a little bit to this extent. He said, okay, look, you make those papadums, I'll make my own papadums, and you eat your papadums and I'll eat mine. Well, his papadum was the song. Mother would always sing a song for the different food items, which you see. There's these for non-Tamilians, people who don't know, in Tamil tradition, very often there are these songs, kind of with an Advaitic theme about different food items. While you're preparing it, you can recite those verses, and it brings in a kind of Advaitic. It kind of infuses the dish with an Advaitic, a theological, a divine significance that it wouldn't otherwise happen, or it wouldn't otherwise be evident, So he said, but no one's written a song on the papadum, so I'll write an Advaitic song on the papadum. So that's what he did. While she rolled out her papadums, getting them ready to cook, he wrote his verses, and that became the Appalam song, the papadum song. So, but of course that wasn't the end of it, in terms of Mother's, I don't want to say difficulty, but it took her some time to get on board with the program of the ashram. And there was one case. See, Bhagavan used to tease her, and many times it was very funny, it was kind of humorous. It might not have been funny for her at the time, but it was funny for him. He was trying to be humorous, but I remember there was one scene here in Skandasramam where I think it was Sabhapati Swami and who else? Narayana Swami. They would come and eat the leftovers from Bhagavan's plate. So strictly speaking, that's a kind of it's a kind of a pollution act, But from their point of view, he was the guru. So to eat his leftovers, in other words, used food, which we don't normally do in the world, but to eat the used food of the guru is the greatest prasadam ever, And so Mother, was maybe eyeing that scene a little awkwardly, and Bhagavan said, see here, Mother, your children, your Orthodox children, how they behave, And there was another scene where, there were many scenes like this, and one a little actually more, it was a little hard on her. She, there were people coming up and down the mountain, mostly people who would come up here to collect wood for burning. There was other grass cutters. They would come up and cut the lemongrass and sell it. It would be used for the roofs, especially in those days when you needed those thatched roofs made of lemongrass. So they would come up, and each day that was their work. And they would invariably stop in the ashram. Well, Bhagavan was very generous and would want to offer them something. So there was one scene where I think it was the woodcutter. It was a single woodcutter who came, and Bhagavan offered him some gruel. But Mother hadn't had her morning breakfast, and she wouldn't eat. If the food is offered to, and see, that's a tradition in her Orthodox tradition, for those who don't know, once that food is offered outside the house, so to say, then it would be impossible for her to take the food. So that meant she wouldn't eat. So Bhagavan offered the woodcutter, and once it's offered, then Mother couldn't eat according to her rules. Okay. Another time, the same thing happened. Bhagavan again, he's slowly trying to instruct her. This is the way he saw it. I don't know what she thought, but these grass cutters came up, and there was a group of them. I think they were coming down. They weren't coming up. They were coming down. They had been working. And Bhagavan asked Chinnaswami, please, bring out, what was it? I don't remember what the food item was, but it could have been gruel. I don't remember. And, Kandaswami was kind of quiet. Well, but Bhagavan, Mother hasn't had her food yet, like that, And he just repeated the request. That doesn't matter. Bring the food out. So Chinnaswami goes in and informs Mother what Bhagavan has said. Well, she comes out and she quietly makes a plea. Bhagavan, blah, blah. And then he kind of laid down the law, and he said, do you know who these people are? These people are the incarnation of Lord Arunachala himself, And that was the end of all that. She gave the food, and she never followed that custom again. From that time on, she was freed of that custom. Now, from the tradition's point of view, the tradition is a tradition. Traditions have value, and Bhagavan was not against tradition, but he was trying to teach her a new tradition, and a new way of living, to let go of. So when the onions were served, or when someone would touch her sari, he would say, "Oh." He would joke with her, all religion is lost. You cannot get moksha now. And it was joking, but it was also half serious too, And Mother caught on, and but it was evidently painful for her. I imagine it was, But in the breach of her, what would you say, her piety and her devotion to the tradition that had. And the rules is not the right word, but the observances and that she had carried out all her life with sincerity, that was hard for her to let go, especially at this late age in her life. Someone comments that what came in the breach of that dharma that she had been practicing was a kind of a generosity that may not have been so acute as it became, and is evidenced by many scenes in the ashram at that time. For example, that same Sabapati Swami who was eating from the Bhagavan's leaf plate, he was known, Mother loved him very much, and he was known to be very generous. He would give away everything that he had. And evidently, he gave away his only dhoti. So he came asking Mother, for some kind of cloth that he could wear. And she didn't have anything. All she had was her sari. So he asked her, well, could you just cut off a couple of meters of your sari? And she agreed. She did it right then and there, cut off a couple of meters of her own sari, and that became his dhoti. So that gives you an indication of the kind of rigor that Bhagavan was asking of the community, So at the same time, generosity, at the same time, not going and being too, not making your needs known to the outside world. Either they had to notice your needs and make an offering, or not, There's one other time that Valamale Swami, the great Murugan devotee, he came here, and He was going to the north. He was on a pilgrimage. And he came to see Bhagavan. And he knew that the ashram had some kamandalus, at least more than one. So he asked Mother. He started by buttering her up, telling her, giving her thanks for what a diamond of a son she had, you know. And then he just asked her, look, you know, Mother, if you could spare me one of the ashram's kamandalus, I'll promise to bring back Ganga Tirtha, you know, water from the Ganga when I return. And she agreed. She gave it. And now, as it turned out, he fulfilled that vow, but it wasn't until 15 years after her passing away. So it was 1937. He came to Ramanashram. This is long after the Skandasramam days. Came to Ramanashram with Ganga Tirtha in that same Kamandalu. Performed Abhishekam at her shrine there in the ashram. Yeah.
Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. 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 Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya.